Every single day, roughly 1,000 people move to Florida. Not visit, move. That's been true for the better part of 30 years. That's not a coincidence. The explanation, it turns out, starts with a map. Why here? Why this flat, hurricane-prone peninsula that barely rises above sea level? No mountains, no mineral wealth, no historical manufacturing base. And yet Florida is now the third most populous state in the country. It's receiving more domestic migration than almost anywhere else on the map. Its GDP rivals entire nations, and it's quietly becoming one of the most consequential financial capitals on the continent. That didn't happen only because of sunshine and theme parks. It happened because of where Florida sits, because of what its geography made structurally inevitable, long before a single highway was paved or a single tax law was signed. Start with its shape. Florida is a peninsula, a long stretch of land projecting southward into warm water, flanked by the Atlantic on one side and the Gulf of Mexico on the other. Peninsulas have a lot of coastline, and coastline historically meant access to fishing, to trade, to every civilization connected by sea. The terrain itself is incredibly flat. The highest natural point in Florida, Britton Hill in the Panhandle, stands just 345 feet above sea level. That's the lowest high point of any state in the country. Florida has no mountains to block movement, no deep valleys to funnel settlement, no natural choke points. Just a wide open limestone platform sitting just above sea level with one of the largest freshwater aquifer systems in the world just beneath it. And then there's the climate. The further south you go, the warmer and more tropical it gets. By the time you reach Miami, you're in the only major metro in the continental United States where frost is essentially unknown. But the first resource Florida cashed in on wasn't the warmth, the beaches, or even the growing season. It was something far less glamorous, and it came from underground. Florida's resource story surprises most people. There's almost no oil here, no coal, no iron ore. What Florida had was phosphate, one of the largest deposits in the world, concentrated in the central part of the state. Phosphate is the primary ingredient in fertilizer. In an industrializing world trying to feed exploding populations, that made Florida extraordinarily valuable. It still produces more phosphate than any other state today. But Florida's most important resource wasn't buried underground. It was the climate itself. Citrus could grow here when every other region was buried under frost. Winter vegetables could ship north from South Florida in December when no other domestic supplier existed. That's not a minor agricultural advantage. That's a geographic monopoly on timing. And warmth, when it becomes reliably available in a cold country, becomes a commodity all on its own. People pay to access it. They travel to it. Eventually, they move to it permanently. Florida was sitting on an enormous reserve of that commodity, and the people would eventually come, but only once they could actually get there. Now here's where Florida's geography becomes genuinely strategic. Stop looking at Florida on just a US map. Look at it on a map of the Western Hemisphere. Florida's southern tip sits 90 miles from Cuba. The Panama Canal, the critical choke point for transoceanic trade, is closer to Miami than it is to New York. The major population centers of Central America, South America, and the Caribbean are all closer to Florida's ports than to any other major U.S. port complex. That's not a coincidence. That's a structural trade advantage. Miami's port became the dominant U.S. gateway for Latin American trade, not because of a policy decision, but because geography made it inevitable. Miami didn't choose to become the commercial capital of Latin America. It was positioned on the map to become that. Inland, the story is corridors. I-95 runs the full length of the East Coast, a spine connecting Miami to Jacksonville and then northward to the entire eastern seaboard. I-75 and I-4 mirror it on the Gulf side and through the interior. Orlando sits almost exactly in the geographic center of the peninsula. Every major corridor passes through or near it. That's not luck, it's by design. Roads converge on the place where travel distance to everywhere else is lowest, and a city grows there. If this is the kind of thinking you're into, hit subscribe. There's new geography to unpack every few days. Florida's settlement history reads like a slow march southward, following the climate shift and the draining of land. The earliest American settlements were in the north, Pensacola, St. Augustine, Tallahassee, because the north was reachable overland from Georgia and the Carolinas, and its climate felt familiar. South Florida was another world. The Everglades, a vast, shallow river of grass flowing slowly toward the sea, covered most of the southern third of the peninsula. It wasn't treacherous, it was just impassable, wet, slow, and trackless. The transformation came through infrastructure. The partial drainage of the Everglades in the early 20th century opened land, and when Henry Flagler's railroad reached Miami in 1896, the city exploded from a small settlement to a regional hub in less than a decade. The settlement map that resulted is almost entirely coastal and corridor-based. Miami, Tampa, Jacksonville, Orlando, all either on the water or along the major transport routes. The interior remains sparse, given over mostly to agriculture, which spreads population thin rather than concentrating it. That structure, dense coastal rings linked by inland corridors, still defines Florida's population today, and we're about to discover why it's growing so much every day. So what kind of state does all of this geography produce? Not an industrial one. Florida never had the coal and iron that built Detroit or Pittsburgh. Florida became a destination state, and in the modern economy, that turns out to be enormously valuable. Tourism arrived first, built on the climate. A services economy followed: hospitality, entertainment, real estate, and real estate became self-reinforcing in a way few industries are. People come for the climate, decide to stay, buy property, attract developers who build more units, which attract more people. The loop runs continuously. Then came the economic kicker: no personal income tax. Florida has had no personal income tax since its constitution was written, a provision voters have repeatedly reinforced. In isolation, that's interesting, but pair it with the climate, the coastline, the Latin American trade position, and the growing amenity base, and it becomes a powerful attractor for a specific kind of mobile capital. High earners, entrepreneurs, retirees, investors. Anyone whose income isn't tied to a physical location face a simple calculation. Same lifestyle, warmer, no state income tax. When remote work eliminated the last friction point, the need to be physically near an employer, that calculation tilted hard toward Florida. Geography might have started the fire, but tax policy poured on the fuel. The migration of hedge funds from Connecticut, private equity from New York, and financial operations from California followed. Firms moved to where their best people wanted to live, and those people chose Florida because the combination of geography, climate, and financial structure was simply better than the alternatives. Meanwhile, the Latin American trade corridor keeps compounding. Miami is now, in a functional sense, the only major North American city that operates as a genuinely bilingual, bicultural business hub. That didn't happen by design. It happened because geography made Miami the logical meeting point between two economic worlds, and the city grew into that role. But before you start packing your bags for Miami, there's something the real estate brochure leaves out. Here's where honesty matters. Because geography gives, and geography takes away. Hurricanes are a direct consequence of Florida's geography. Because it's a long, flat peninsula projecting into warm tropical water with one of the most active storm seasons on the planet, Florida is a natural target. The same warm waters that make its coastlines attractive are the energy source that intensifies storms before landfall. The economic consequences of this are getting worse. Florida's property insurance market is under severe stress. Several major insurers have exited the state entirely. Those remaining have raised premiums to levels that are beyond what ordinary homeowners can absorb in many markets. Geography creates risk, and risk is expensive. Water is the second constraint. Florida sits atop an enormous aquifer, but salt water from rising seas is pushing into coastal freshwater systems. The state is surrounded by water and may face meaningful freshwater challenges within a generation. The irony is painful. Infrastructure is the third constraint. Florida's growth has been so rapid and so spread out that roads, utilities, and transit are perpetually behind. Explosive growth requires constant new construction across enormous distances. The costs are high and continuous. None of these constraints make Florida's trajectory implausible. But they do mean the next chapter isn't simply more of the same. It's a negotiation between structural advantages and structural risks that are, at their core, both geographic. So what is Florida when you strip away the politics and the headlines? It's the fastest growing demographic story in America. And it didn't happen randomly. A peninsula pointed at the hemisphere's most dynamic trade region, a climate that turned warmth into a commodity, a flat, buildable landscape that could absorb explosive growth in a way most states simply couldn't, and a tax structure that, combined with all of it, made relocating here the rational choice for anyone with the freedom to choose. The geography wasn't designed. The tax policy was, but it only worked because the geography was already doing so much of the heavy lifting. The 1,000 people moving here every day aren't chasing a trend. They're responding to structural forces that have been building for over a century: geography, climate, trade position, and financial incentive, all pointing in the same direction. The constraints are real: the hurricanes, the insurance market, the water, the infrastructure strain. Geography doesn't hand you a gift, it hands you a package. But for now, the advantages are compounding faster than the risks. And until that changes, the 1,000 people a day will keep coming. That's not a marketing story. That's the geography effect.